The Galactic Hospice Station floated in the emptiness of space, circling around a dying red star that barely gave off any light anymore. It was the kind of place nobody wanted to think about. Every species in the galaxy had one. A place where the old and the sick went when there was nothing left to do but wait for the end. The station was massive, stretching for miles in every direction, with thousands of corridors and rooms. Most of them were quiet. Peaceful, even. Families would visit sometimes, sitting beside their loved ones, holding whatever appendages their species had, sharing memories one last time. But mostly, it was just the hum of machines and the soft footsteps of medical drones rolling through the hallways, checking vitals, delivering nutrients, making sure everyone was comfortable in their final days. Emily Brooks had been working there for exactly 9 days when she first heard about Ward 77X. She was human, 26 years old, fresh out of the cultural exchange program that Earth had set up with the Galactic Alliance. Her assignment was simple enough. Help out at the hospice station, learn about other species, show them that humans could be compassionate and useful members of the galactic community. Most days involved bringing blankets to elderly aliens, helping them contact their families, or just sitting and listening to their stories. It was the listening part that Emily was good at. Back on Earth, she'd volunteered at nursing homes since she was a teenager. She'd always had a knack for making people feel heard, even when they were talking about things nobody else wanted to hear anymore. But Ward 77X was different. She'd been walking past it during her second night shift when she noticed the door. It wasn't like the others. This one was reinforced, made of some kind of black metal she didn't recognize, with warning symbols from at least a dozen different species plastered across it. There were blast marks around the edges, old ones, like someone had tried to break in or break out at some point. Emily stopped and stared at it. The door had no window. No name plate. Just a number painted in faded red. 77X. She pulled out her datapad and tried to access the ward's information. Access denied flashed across the screen in 6 different languages. That was weird. Emily had clearance to access almost every patient file on the station. It was part of her job to know who needed what, who had visitors coming, who needed extra attention. She made a note to ask about it the next day. When her shift ended, she found her supervisor, a creature named the Loss from the Vrelnian homeworld. The Loss looked sort of like a purple octopus standing upright, with dozens of thin tendrils instead of arms and 3 dark eyes that blinked independently of each other. Emily approached him carefully. The Vrelnians were always polite, but they didn't like being bothered with unnecessary questions. The Loss, I was wondering about Ward 77X. I noticed I don't have access to the patient information there. All 3 of Thelos's eyes focused on her at once. His tendrils went very still. Ward 77X is not your concern, he said, his voice coming out through a translation device that made him sound oddly formal. The patient there requires no direct care. All systems are automated. You are not to enter that ward under any circumstances. Do you understand? Emily nodded slowly. Sure, but who's in there? Don't they need someone to check on them? No. Thelos's tendrils twitched, which Emily had learned meant he was uncomfortable. That patient is too dangerous for direct contact. Even in his current state. You will forget about Ward 77X, Emily Brooks. This is not a request. And that was that. The Loss floated away down the corridor, his tendrils rippling behind him. But of course, Emily didn't forget. She started paying attention every time she walked past that door. She noticed that the medical drones never entered. They just parked outside, extended long mechanical arms through special ports in the wall, and delivered whatever was needed without ever going inside. She checked the station's public records and found a single line of information. Ward 77X, patient designation, Vorith. Species, Draconis. Status, terminal. Draconis. Dragons. Emily's breath caught. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the dragons. They'd been in every history lesson she'd sat through during her training. 500 years ago, they'd nearly conquered half the known galaxy. They were massive creatures, intelligent and terrifying, who could breathe actual fire and had ships that could crack planets in half. The Galactic Alliance had fought a war against them that lasted 70 years. Billions had died. Entire worlds had been burned. The dragons had finally been defeated, their empire scattered, their species reduced to a handful of survivors who'd agreed to live in isolated systems under strict observation. And apparently, one of them was dying right here, just down the hall from where Emily made her rounds every night. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was Vorith? What had he done during the war? Why was he alone? Didn't dragons have families, friends, someone who cared? On her fourth night, Emily made a decision that would probably get her fired. Maybe even arrested, depending on how serious the Alliance was about their security protocols. She waited until the station reached its quiet hours, when most of the staff was either resting or focused on the critical care wards. Then she pulled out her personal datapad, the one she'd modified back on Earth to bypass corporate security systems. It was technically illegal, but half the tech-savvy kids on Earth had one. She'd never actually used it for anything serious before. Until now. It took her 20 minutes, but she managed to cycle through the security protocols and unlock Ward 77X. The door hissed open, releasing a wave of hot air that smelled like sulfur and ash. Emily's heart hammered in her chest. She grabbed the worn paperback she'd brought from her quarters and stepped inside before she could change her mind. The ward was enormous, at least 3 times the size of a normal room, with reinforced walls that looked like they could survive a bomb blast. And in the center, on a massive platform designed to hold something incredibly heavy, lay the dragon. Vorith was huge. Even lying down, dying, he was the size of a small spacecraft. His scales, which might have once gleamed gold, were now dull bronze, cracked and faded. His wings were folded against his sides, torn and scarred. His chest rose and fell slowly, laboriously, like every breath was a battle. And then his eye opened. Just one. The size of a dinner plate, glowing molten gold even in his weakened state. Emily froze. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But she didn't. She pulled up a small chair, set it just outside his reach, and sat down. Have they sent an assassin? The dragon's voice was like grinding stone and dying embers. How fitting. A prey species to end me. Emily's hands trembled as she opened her book. I'm not here to kill you. I'm Emily. I thought you might like some company. Emily came back the next night. And the night after that. And the night after that. She didn't ask permission. She knew if she did, they'd say no. So she just kept bypassing the security system, slipping into Ward 77X during the quiet hours when nobody was paying attention, and settling into her chair with whatever book she'd chosen for the evening. Vorith never spoke after that first night. He just lay there, his massive chest rising and falling, his single eye watching her. Sometimes he'd close it, pretending to sleep, but Emily could tell he was listening. His breathing would change slightly when she got to an exciting part of the story, or his clawed fingers would twitch when a character said something particularly clever. She'd started with the Count of Monte Cristo, figuring a story about revenge might appeal to a dragon who'd spent his life as a warrior. Then she moved on to Kill a Mockingbird, then The Hobbit, then whatever else she could find in the station's human literature database. 3 weeks went by like this. Emily would finish her regular shift, grab a few hours of sleep, then sneak into Ward 77X and read until her voice got tired. She'd leave before the morning staff came on duty, looking over her shoulder to make sure nobody saw her. But of course, someone eventually noticed. The station's AI system was sophisticated. It tracked everything, every door opened, every person who went where they weren't supposed to be. Emily had been careful, but not careful enough. On her 22nd visit, the system flagged her biometric signature appearing in a restricted zone multiple times and sent an alert to the administration. She was in the middle of reading The Great Gatsby when 2 security officers appeared at the ward entrance. They looked shocked to see her sitting there, calmly reading to a dragon who could have killed her with one swipe of his tail. Miss Brooks, one of them said, his voice tight with panic. Step away from the patient immediately. Emily closed her book and stood up slowly. Vorith's eye followed her, but he didn't move. Didn't speak. Just watched. The security officers escorted her out, and within an hour, she was standing in Administrator Kelvin's office. Kelvin was a Centaurian, which meant he looked sort of like a tall, blue humanoid with extra joints in all his limbs and eyes that could see in spectrums humans couldn't even imagine. He was not happy. Do you have any idea what you've done? Kelvin's voice was cold and controlled. That patient is one of the most dangerous beings ever to exist. He's responsible for the deaths of millions. Millions, Miss Brooks. And you've been sneaking in there every night like you're visiting your grandfather. Emily met his gaze steadily. He's dying. Nobody's talked to him in who knows how long. I thought he deserved some company. Deserved? Kelvin's eyes flashed. He deserves nothing. Do you know what he did during the Dragon Wars? He commanded the assault on Proxima Colony. 3 million people died in a single day. Burned alive. Children, families, civilians who never did anything to him or his species. And you think he deserves company? Emily's jaw tightened. I know what he did. I read the reports. All of them. But he's still a living being, and he's dying alone in a locked room with nobody to even acknowledge he exists. That was the agreement when he surrendered, Kelvin said. Isolated hospice care. No contact. No visitors. Those were the terms the Alliance gave him instead of execution. Well, maybe those terms were wrong. Kelvin stared at her like she just suggested they set the station on fire. He opened his mouth to respond, probably to tell her she was being shipped back to Earth immediately, when his assistant appeared at the door. Sir, you need to hear this. The assistant, a young woman from one of the outer colonies, held up a datapad. We pulled the audio logs from Ward 77X. You need to listen to this. Kelvin took the datapad and pressed play. Emily heard her own voice reading from To Kill a Mockingbird, the part where Atticus Finch talks about walking in someone else's shoes. And then she heard something that made her breath catch. Voritha's voice. Rough and quiet, but clear. Your Atticus is a fool, the dragon said on the recording. Justice is not blind. It sees exactly what it wants to see and ignores the rest. There was a pause, then Emily's voice. Maybe. But at least he tried. Another pause. Then Vorith again, stronger this time. Trying is what the weak do when they cannot act. I learned this young. The galaxy does not reward those who try. It rewards those who take. And where did that get you? Emily's voice asked. You're here, aren't you? Alone. Dying. With nothing to show for all that taking except regret. The recording went silent for almost a minute. Then Vorith spoke again, and this time his voice was different. Softer. Almost thoughtful. You speak as my grandmother once spoke. She believed in words over fire. I had her executed for cowardice. Perhaps that is why I am here, as you say. Alone. Kelvin stopped the recording and looked at Emily with an expression she couldn't quite read. He's talking, Kelvin said quietly. Vorith hasn't spoken to anyone in 200 years. Not to guards, not to medical staff, not to the Alliance diplomats who tried to interview him. He just stopped talking. And now he's having philosophical debates with you about human literature. Emily didn't know what to say to that. Kelvin played more recordings. Hours of them. Sometimes it was just Emily reading and Vorith listening. But increasingly, there were conversations. Real ones. Vorith would interrupt her reading to argue about a character's motivations, or to compare human morality to dragon philosophy, or to tell her about his own experiences in ways that made Emily's blood run cold but also made her understand him better. There was one exchange where Emily had asked him why dragons had started the war in the first place. Fear, Vorith had answered simply. We were the oldest species in our region. We watched younger species rise, spread, multiply. We saw our future. Replaced. Forgotten. Made irrelevant. So we chose to be feared instead. If we could not be eternal, we would at least be remembered. You're remembered, Emily had said. But not the way you wanted. No. Not the way we wanted. Kelvin finished listening and set down the datapad. He looked at Emily for a long time, his alien features unreadable. I should send you home, he said finally. What you did was reckless, dangerous, and violated about 15 different protocols. Emily nodded. I know. But. Kelvin paused. The Alliance has been trying to get Vorith to talk for centuries. Historians want to know about dragon culture before the wars. Psychologists want to understand their motivations. And he's refused every single attempt at communication. Until you showed up with your books. He pulled up a legal document on his screen. I'm going to need you to sign about 30 liability waivers. If he kills you, it's not on me or this station. Understood? Emily blinked. Wait, you're letting me continue. I'm not letting you do anything, Kelvin said firmly. But I'm also not going to stop you. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Just, try not to get eaten. After the meeting with Administrator Kelvin, everything changed. Emily didn't have to sneak anymore. She could walk right into Ward 77X through the front door, though she still got nervous looks from the other staff members. Some of them thought she was crazy. Others thought she was brave. A few thought she was both. Emily didn't care much what they thought. She just kept showing up every night with her books. But as the weeks went on, something shifted between her and Vorith. The reading sessions became less about the books and more about the conversations that happened in between. Vorith was getting weaker, his voice becoming more strained with each passing day, but he seemed almost desperate to talk. Like he'd been holding words inside for centuries and they were finally pouring out. One night, Emily brought a collection of science fiction short stories. She'd barely finished the first page when Vorith interrupted her. "Your human stories always have heroes," he said, his massive head shifting slightly to look at her better. "Brave individuals who stand against impossible odds and win through determination and moral superiority. It is nauseating." Emily smiled a little. She'd gotten used to his blunt manner. "You don't believe in heroes?" "I believe in survivors," Vorith rumbled. "Those who do what must be done, regardless of how history judges them. Your heroes are fantasies. Comfortable lies you tell yourselves to sleep better at night." "Maybe," Emily said, setting the book down. "But fantasies can be important. They show us what we could be, even if we're not there yet. They give us something to aim for." Vorith made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it came out more like a cough. "Humans? Always reaching for stars you cannot touch. Do you know what we called your species when we first encountered you? The Dreamers. We thought you would be easy to conquer. So soft, so idealistic, so convinced that the universe cared about your feelings. But you didn't conquer us," Emily pointed out. "No. We did not." Vorith's eye dimmed slightly. "We underestimated you. We saw your compassion and assumed it meant weakness. We did not understand that humans can be kind and ruthless at the same time. That you can weep for your enemies and still destroy them utterly. It was confusing. Dragons are not built that way." Emily leaned forward in her chair. "How are dragons built?" And that's when Vorith really started talking. He told her about the dragon homeworld, a planet with crystal caves that went miles deep into the crust. Dragons didn't build cities like other species. They lived in these caves, each family claiming their own cavern system, decorating the walls with flame art that would last for millennia. He told her about the singing ceremonies, where young dragons would learn their history through songs that were literally breathed in fire, the flames creating patterns in the air that represented words and ideas. Writing, Vorith explained, was considered crude and lifeless. Real stories needed fire, needed heat, needed the physical presence of the storyteller. "It sounds beautiful," Emily said softly. It was. Vorith's voice carried a weight of grief that made Emily's chest ache. "Before we destroyed it all." "What do you mean?" Vorith was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her about the civil war that had torn his species apart 3,000 years ago. Two philosophies had emerged among the dragons. One group believed they should share the galaxy with other species, learn from them, trade with them. The other group, Vorith's group, believed that dragons were meant to rule, that their strength and longevity gave them the right to dominate. The war had lasted 500 years. The peaceful dragons lost. Most were killed. The rest were exiled or forced to accept the new way. And then the expansion began, the conquest of other species, the building of an empire on fear and fire. "We told ourselves we were glorious," Vorith said. "That we were fulfilling our destiny. But really, we were just afraid. Afraid of becoming irrelevant. Afraid of watching younger, faster breeding species overtake us. Afraid of dying out." Emily thought about that. "Fear doesn't justify what you did." "No," Vorith agreed. "It does not. But perhaps it explains. Your stories, Emily Brooks, they teach me something I did not understand during the wars. All species fear. All species struggle with their own mortality and insignificance. But only some choose to lash out at the galaxy because of it. Others, like you humans, choose to connect instead." Over the following nights, Emily started sharing more about Earth, about humanity's own bloody history. She told Vorith about the world wars, about nuclear weapons, about genocides and colonization and all the terrible things humans had done to each other. "We're not saints," she said one evening. "We've made horrible mistakes. We're still making them. We have people on Earth right now who want to conquer other species, who think humans should rule the galaxy just because we're clever and adaptable. Then why do you not let them?" Vorith asked. "Why do you resist your own nature?" "Because that's not our nature," Emily said firmly. "Or at least, it's not the only part of our nature. Yeah, we can be violent and territorial and scared. But we can also be kind. We can choose to be better than our worst impulses. That's what makes us human, I think. The choice." Vorith considered this. Dragons did not believe in choice. We believed in destiny. In the natural order. The strong ruled, the weak served. It was simply how things were meant to be. "And where did that belief get you?" "Here," Vorith said quietly. "Dying alone in a locked room, the last of my kind who still remembers what we were before we became monsters." Word of the conversation spread throughout the station. Other species started requesting copies of the audio logs. Historians, philosophers, psychologists, everyone wanted to hear what Vorith was saying. Some were appalled that Emily was treating him with kindness. Others were fascinated by the insights into dragon culture. A news crew from one of the outer colonies even showed up, wanting to interview Emily. She refused. This wasn't about her becoming famous. This was about a dying being finally having someone to talk to. One night, Emily asked Vorith why he'd stopped talking to everyone else. Why he'd remained silent for 200 years until she showed up. Vorith's eye focused on her with an intensity that made her shiver. Because they wanted something from me. Confessions. Apologies. Justifications. They wanted me to be a monster they could study, or a villain they could feel superior to. You are the first person who simply wanted to know me. Not what I did. Not what I represent. Just, me. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. Everyone deserves that. To be known as themselves. Do I? Vorith asked. After everything I have done? Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I don't know if you deserve it. But I think you need it. And I think maybe I need it too. Why would you need this? Emily hadn't planned to tell him. But something about the darkness of the ward, the intimacy of their conversations, made her want to be honest. My brother died in the frontier conflicts, she said quietly. He was on a colony ship that got caught in a skirmish between two alien factions. Wrong place, wrong time. He was 22. Had his whole life ahead of him. Vorith listened in silence. I was so angry, Emily continued. I wanted someone to blame. I almost joined one of those human supremacy groups, the ones who think we should just wipe out any species that threatens us. I was that close to becoming exactly what I hate. What stopped you? My brother's last message to me. He'd sent it right before the attack. He was talking about this alien kid he'd met on the colony, some species I'd never heard of. And he was so excited about learning their language, about sharing music with them. He said the universe was full of amazing people if we just took the time to know them. Emily wiped her eyes. So I came here. To the hospice station. To learn how to see people instead of just species. And somehow I ended up talking to you. Vorith was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that Emily would never forget. Your brother was wiser than I ever was. And you honor him by being here. By choosing connection over hatred. That is a strength dragons never possessed. The medical system started sending alerts more frequently now. Vorith's biological furnace, the internal fire that had kept him alive for over 1,000 years, was burning out. The temperature readings dropped every day. His scales, already dull, were starting to crack and flake away like old paint. Emily noticed he slept more now. Sometimes she'd arrive and he wouldn't wake up for the first hour. She'd just sit there, reading quietly, waiting. When he did wake, his voice was weaker, raspier, like something was grinding away inside his chest. But he still wanted to talk. One evening, Emily brought a collection of poetry. She thought maybe shorter pieces would be easier for him, less taxing. She started reading a poem about loss and memory when Vorith interrupted her. Tell me about your worst moment, he said, his eye half closed. Not mine. Yours. Your darkest truth. Emily set the book down. They'd talked about a lot of things over the past weeks, but she'd kept some parts of herself hidden. The ugly parts. The parts she was ashamed of. Why do you want to know? Because I am dying, Vorith said simply. And I am tired of only sharing my own darkness. I want to understand yours. I want to know if humans, for all your talk of choice and compassion, also carry shadows you cannot escape. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she started talking. She told him about the year after her brother died. About how the grief had turned into rage, hot and consuming. She told him about finding those supremacy groups online, the ones who talked about human superiority, about making the galaxy safe by eliminating potential threats before they could hurt anyone else. I went to meetings, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. I listened to them talk about how we needed to strike first, how being kind was the same as being weak. And the terrible thing is, it made sense to me. I was so angry, so hurt, I wanted someone to pay for what happened to my brother. Vorith listened without interrupting. There was this one meeting where they were planning something. An attack on a refugee settlement. Mixed species, mostly civilians who'd fled from war zones. The group said they were potential insurgents, that we needed to take them out before they became a problem. Emily's hands were shaking now. And I almost went along with it. I was in the vehicle, ready to go. I had a weapon. I was prepared to hurt innocent people because I was too broken to see them as people anymore. What stopped you? Vorith asked quietly. I saw a kid. Just a little alien kid, couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 in human years. Playing with a ball outside one of the shelters. And I thought about my brother, about how excited he'd been to meet alien kids, to learn from them. And I realized I was about to destroy exactly what he'd died believing in. Emily wiped her eyes. I got out of the vehicle. Walked away. Reported the group to the authorities. They were arrested before they could hurt anyone. But I still think about it. About how close I came to becoming a monster. Vorith was silent for a long moment. Then he said, You think that makes you like me? Doesn't it? No. Vorith's eye opened fully, glowing with that molten gold intensity. You stopped. You chose differently. I never did. Do you know how many times I could have chosen differently? How many moments I had where I could have said no, this is wrong, we should not do this. Emily leaned forward in her chair. Thousands, Vorith continued. Thousands of moments. Every battle. Every planet. Every time I gave the order to fire on civilians. And I never stopped. I told myself it was necessary. That it was war. That history would vindicate us. But really, I was just afraid to admit I was wrong. He shifted slightly, the movement clearly painful. There was one moment in particular. A colony world called Meridian. Small population, mostly farmers and scientists. They had no military, no weapons, no way to fight back. My fleet arrived to claim the planet for dragon expansion. Vorith's voice grew quieter. The colony leader contacted me. An old woman from some species I do not even remember the name of now. She asked if we could negotiate. Said they would share the planet, share their resources, work together. She was crying. Begging. And I could have said yes. The planet was large enough for both populations. There was no strategic reason to refuse. But you didn't say yes, Emily said softly. No. I gave the order to burn the settlements. All of them. We killed 30,000 people in less than an hour. And when my second-in-command questioned the order, asked why we had not negotiated, do you know what I said? Emily shook her head. I said that mercy was weakness. That if we showed compassion to one colony, others would expect it too, and our expansion would slow. I sacrificed 30,000 lives for the sake of efficiency. The silence in the ward was heavy, oppressive. I remember her face, Vorith said. That old woman. I remember every face from that day. They haunt me. Every single one. And Meridian was just one planet. I did the same thing dozens of times. Emily didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to comfort him, to say something that would ease his suffering. But another part of her, the part that understood the weight of those deaths, couldn't find any words that seemed adequate. Do you want me to tell you it's okay? Emily asked finally. That you're forgiven? No, Vorith said. I do not want forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I want you to understand the difference between us. You came close to darkness and turned back. I dove into it and swam in it for centuries. You carry guilt for what you almost did. I carry oceans of blood for what I actually did. Then why tell me this? Emily asked. Why torture yourself with these memories now? Vorith's eye closed. Because I want someone to know. The real me. Not the legend, not the monster from the history books. I want one person to understand what I was, what I did, and why I did it. Before the fire goes out completely. Emily sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. This was more than she'd expected, more than she knew how to handle. But she'd committed to being here, to listening, to knowing Vorith as he truly was. There's something else, Vorith said, his voice barely a whisper now. Something I have never told anyone. The reason I stopped talking for 200 years. You don't have to. I do, Vorith insisted. Please. Let me say this. Emily nodded. The last battle of the war, Vorith began. When the Alliance finally cornered the Dragon fleet. We knew we would lose. We had known for years, but we kept fighting anyway. Pride. Stubbornness. The inability to admit defeat. He paused, gathering strength. There was one dragon on my flagship. My grandmother. She was ancient even by our standards, nearly 3,000 years old. She had opposed the wars from the beginning. Argued that we should have chosen peace, cooperation, adaptation. She called it cowardice to attack others because we feared our own irrelevance. Emily's breath caught. She had a feeling she knew where this was going. When the War Council decided to continue fighting even after it became clear we would lose, she spoke against it one final time. Said we should surrender, accept whatever terms the Alliance offered, try to preserve what was left of our species and our culture. The Council voted to execute her for treason. Voritha's voice broke. I led the firing squad. My own grandmother. I looked her in the eyes and gave the order. And do you know what her last words were? Emily couldn't speak. She said, "One day you will understand that strength without wisdom is just violence, and violence without end is extinction. I hope you learn this before there is nothing left to save." Then she died. A sound escaped Vorith that Emily had never heard before. It was something between a roar and a sob, a cry of anguish from a creature who had carried this burden for centuries. She was right, Vorith said. About everything. And I killed her for it. That is who I am, Emily Brooks. That is my darkest truth. The medical alerts came every few hours now. Voritha's core temperature had dropped to critical levels. His breathing was shallow and irregular. The automated systems calculated he had maybe 2 days left, possibly less. Emily stopped going to her quarters entirely. She brought blankets and pillows into Ward 77X and set up a small camp near Voritha's platform. Administrator Kelvin didn't say anything about it. Neither did anyone else. They all understood, in their own way, that something important was happening here. Something that went beyond protocol and rules. Other staff members started leaving things outside the ward. Hot coffee for Emily. Small tokens and notes of support. One nurse from the Andarian species left a traditional blessing stone, whispering to Emily that even the most troubled souls deserved peace at the end. Emily had stopped reading from books. Vorith was too weak for that now. Instead, they just talked. Quiet conversations in the dim light of the ward, punctuated by long silences when Vorith needed to rest. On what would turn out to be the last day, Emily brought one final book. A thin, worn copy of The Little Prince that she'd had since she was a child. Her father had read it to her when she was young, and she'd carried it with her everywhere ever since. She wasn't sure Vorith would have the strength to listen, but when she pulled it out, his eye opened slightly. A children's book. His voice was barely audible now, like wind through dead leaves. An odd choice for the end. Emily opened to the first page. It's not really a children's book. It's about connections. About how knowing someone, even briefly, changes you forever. Makes them matter. Do I matter? Vorith asked. To you? Emily set the book down and looked at him directly. Yes. Not because of what you were, or what you did, but because of these weeks. Because you talked to me. Because you let me know you, the real you, not just the monster from the history books. Voritha's eye closed slowly, then opened again. I do not understand humans. You show kindness to those who deserve only judgment. You offer companionship to those who have earned isolation. It is illogical. Maybe, Emily said. But maybe logic isn't everything. Maybe sometimes you just sit with someone because they are alone, and being alone at the end is the worst thing you can imagine. They sat in silence for a while. Emily could hear the medical systems humming, tracking Voritha's failing vitals. His breathing was getting worse. Emily Brooks, Vorith said suddenly, with more strength than he'd had in days. I have one story left. One I have never told anyone. Will you hear it? Of course. Vorith took a long, shuddering breath. My grandmother. The one I told you about. Before she died, before I gave that terrible order, she asked to speak with me privately. One last time. Emily leaned closer, not wanting to miss a word. We went to an observation deck on the flagship. Just the two of us. She was so old, so tired, but her mind was still sharp. She looked out at the stars and asked me what I saw. Vorith paused, gathering his thoughts. I told her I saw territory to conquer. Resources to claim. Threats to eliminate. And she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a sad one. She said that was exactly the problem with our people. We looked at the infinite universe and only saw what we could take from it. What did she see? Emily asked softly. Stories, Vorith said. She saw billions of species, each with their own histories, their own songs, their own ways of understanding existence. She said the universe was a library, and we were burning books we'd never bothered to read. Voritha's breathing became more labored. Emily reached out without thinking and placed her hand on his massive claw. It was cooler than it should have been, the fire inside him almost gone. She told me that dragons had a choice, Vorith continued. We could either learn to share the galaxy and be enriched by it, or we could try to conquer it and be consumed by our own fire. She begged me to choose wisdom over strength. And you chose strength, Emily said quietly. Yes. And it destroyed everything. Our empire. Our culture. Our future. We're extinct now, did you know that? I am the last dragon alive. When I die, our entire species dies with me. Because we chose fire over wisdom. Emily felt tears running down her face. I'm sorry. Do not be sorry for me, Vorith said. Be sorry for what we could have been. My grandmother showed me that path, and I rejected it. I killed her for showing me. That is my real crime. Not the battles, not the conquests. Those were terrible, yes. But the worst thing I did was silence the one voice that could have saved us all. The medical system started beeping more urgently. Vorith's vitals were dropping fast. Emily, Vorith said, his voice fading. Would you read to me? From your book. Just a little. Emily opened The Little Prince with shaking hands and began to read. She read about the fox and the rose, about taming and being tamed, about how connections make things unique and precious. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly, she read. What is essential is invisible to the eye. Vorith made a sound that might have been agreement. Your species understands something we never did. That the strongest bonds are not chains of conquest, but threads of understanding. That is why you will survive when we could not. His breathing was very shallow now. Emily could see his chest barely moving. Emily Brooks. Thank you. For the stories. For talking. For seeing me as more than just my crimes. I was not worthy of it. Everyone is worthy of being heard, Emily said, her voice breaking. Even when they don't believe it themselves. Then humans are braver than any species I ever fought. Braver than dragons ever were. Vorith took one more labored breath. Tell them. Tell the galaxy. One dragon learned to listen before the fire went out. Tell them my grandmother was right. Tell them that wisdom matters more than strength. I will, Emily promised. I'll tell them. Vorith's eye focused on her one last time. You would have liked her. My grandmother. She believed what you believe. That every voice matters. That every story deserves to be heard. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I wish I had listened. You're listening now, Emily said, squeezing his claw gently. Too late. But perhaps that is the last story worth telling. That it is never too late to understand. Even if it is too late to change. His eye closed. His breathing stopped. The medical systems let out a long, continuous tone. Emily sat there for a long time, her hand still on his claw, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't crying for a monster or a war criminal. She was crying for a person who had finally understood what he'd lost, just in time to lose everything else too. Administrator Kelvin found her there hours later. He didn't say anything, just put a hand on her shoulder and waited. Eventually, Emily stood up. She looked at Vorith's body, massive and still, the last dragon in the universe. I need to file a report, she said quietly. I know. Emily's report spread across the galactic networks faster than anyone expected. Not because it was sensational or dramatic, but because it was honest. She told the story exactly as it had happened. A human and a dragon, talking in the darkness, sharing stories until the fire went out. The galaxy didn't know what to make of it. Some people were angry, saying Vorith didn't deserve kindness or dignity. Others were moved, seeing it as proof that even the worst beings could grow and change. Most people fell somewhere in between, unsure what to think but unable to stop thinking about it. But among the younger species, especially humans, the story became something else. It became proof of something they'd always believed but couldn't always articulate. That mercy wasn't weakness. That listening to someone didn't mean forgiving them. That you could acknowledge someone's humanity, or dragonness, while still holding them accountable for their actions. Emily went back to Earth eventually, but she carried those conversations with her. She became a speaker, traveling to different worlds, talking about what she'd learned. Not that Vorith was redeemed. Not that his crimes were forgiven. But that everyone, even at the end, deserved to be heard. And in the archives of the Galactic Hospice Station, in the recordings from Ward 77X, Vorith's final words were preserved forever. Tell them wisdom matters more than strength. Tell them listening matters more than conquering. Tell them one dragon learned this truth, even though he learned it too late. That became humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not superior technology or military might. But the stubborn, foolish, magnificent insistence that every being deserved to be heard. That every story mattered. That connection was stronger than conquest. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, when Emily thought about those weeks in Ward 77X, she hoped that somewhere, somehow, Voratha's grandmother knew that her words had finally been heard. That one dragon, at the very end, had chosen wisdom over fire. It was a small victory in the face of immense tragedy. But it was a victory nonetheless. And for humans, small victories were how you changed the universe, one conversation at a time.